What's going on, Jets fans? Welcome to the latest edition of Jets Latest, where you get the latest on the Jets, Jets. I'm your host, the spitting statistician, Dane Martinez, and we have got a stacked episode today. There is a new Jet. The Jets made a signing. We will talk about that. There is a pro day going on today that I think the Jets have significant interest in, but it may not be for the reasons you think. And I've been saying to follow the money, right? And I've been saying to follow who they target in free agency to give you clues about what the Jets plan is for the draft. I have another way to follow the money that may give us clues about the Jets 2025 draft. But let's start with the news. The Jets have a new wide receiver, and it is Josh Reynolds. I want to talk to you about this because I've said for a while that the Jets would probably be able to sprinkle in a veteran at the wide receiver position, right? I said they'd be able to do it for a little bit cheaper than, say, Allen Lazard, and I thought that because there was a surplus, they would have no problem finding one who was probably in his early to mid 30s that could be kind of a veteran presence. Well, let me tell you something. I think Josh Reynolds is better than all of that. They signed him to a 1 year up to a $5 million deal. He is 30 years old, so he would be one of the elder statesmen here, as you know, with Aaron Glenn, Darren Moji going with the youth movement. And so he becomes that veteran that we sprinkle in. I think over the last 2 years, he's been pretty good. Only 2 dropped passes in the last 2 years. Didn't play in all the games last year, but back in 2023, he had 600 yards receiving and 5 touchdowns for the Detroit Lions. So Aaron Glenn knows who he is. Aaron Glenn is clearly comfortable with him and likes him. That's why they targeted him. And then last year, you know where Josh Reynolds was? The Denver Broncos for some of his time. And who is in the front office there? Darren Moji, right? So both Moji and Glenn had familiarity with Reynolds. That means they think he is a culture fit here as well. He has been productive. Like I said, he had over 600 yards in 2023, only 2 drops the last couple of years. And his yards per catch is over 15 yards in most of the last few seasons, right? So he can make the big play. Here's what this also means, in my opinion. Allen Lazard is done, okay? There's not going to be room for these 2 veteran wide receivers at this money. So whether it's a trade, whether it's a training camp cut post June 1st or whatever, I do not believe Allen Lazard is going to be on this roster. So now, if you take a look at the wide receiver room, right, there is Garrett Wilson. I think he is the number 1 wide receiver. Then you have a couple of guys that they have signed that are more likely wide receiver 3s, but could become the number 2 and be just fine opposite Garrett Wilson. Those being Josh Reynolds, who we just signed, and if you remember when we brought in Tyler Johnson, right, who's a Super Bowl winning player, okay? And then, of course, there is Malachi Corley, who was last year's 3rd round pick, and many people are expecting a little bit of a jump up for him in year 2. Those are 4 wide receivers. I still believe the Jets will use some kind of significant draft asset on a wide receiver as well. I don't think it's Ted McMillan at number 7, but we have been talking about options in the 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round. You put all those together, you have a legitimate number 1 in Garrett Wilson. You have a kid that I think they are going to bring on in the kind of early rounds of the draft next month as potentially a 2 or a 3. You have Josh Reynolds as a 2 or a 3. You have Tyler Johnson as a 2 or a 3. And then you have Malachi Corley probably as your wide receiver 4-5. That is a pretty good 5 wide receiver kind of room, to be quite frank, okay? Especially for a team that I think is going to be run heavy anyway with Breece Hall and, of course, the dual threat nature of Justin Fields at quarterback, okay? So Josh Reynolds is the newest Jet, 1-year deal, $5 million up to it, incentives, bonuses, that sort of thing. And I think the biggest piece here is doesn't drop the ball, and both Glenn and Moji were familiar with him, targeted him, liked him, and quite frankly, I think he is better, younger, and not as washed or dusted as some of the other kind of vets that I was talking about here on Jets Latest that they could have sprinkled in a little bit later on as we got into training camp. He is still relatively young at age 30 as opposed to the guys like Tyler Boyd and Nelson Aguilar and, you know, some of the others that they could have brought in, the Brandon Cookses of the world, the Tyler Lockett's of the world that I thought could have been this vet. There is still some juice, and he has been good. over the last couple of years. I did say also that I still believe the Jets are going to use a pick in rounds 2, 3, or 4 with a wide receiver. And that brings me to one of the pro days that is going on. It is at Ole Miss today. The Ole Miss Running Rebels are having their pro day today, and there's going to be a lot of people in attendance. You are going to hear a lot of buzz today coming out of the Ole Miss pro day about Jackson Dart. Okay, there's going to be a lot of reports there that maybe the Jets were looking at Jackson Dart, that a lot of teams thought about Jackson Dart. Jackson Dart is probably going to make a couple of, sensational throws and talk about why he is moving up the draft boards. Don't get fooled by this. I do not believe the Jets are targeting Jackson Dart, nor should they be targeting Jackson Dart. They have Justin Fields and they have Tyrod as their backup. They have Jordan Travis as their development. However, I do believe there are 3 other players who will be at the Ole Miss Pro Day that the Jets may have their eye on even more. And the first is a wide receiver, Trey Harris. This is a guy who may be kind of part of the Jets' plan at rounds 2, 3, or 4. Wide receiver, 6'2", 205 pounds, a second-team All-American, okay? So clearly a stud, had 60 catches, over 1,000 yards in only 8 games last year. As a senior, he ran a 4.5 40 at the combine. We'll see what he does at the pro day. He profiles as a bigger target, an ex-wide receiver, a long strider. Could be that guy that is drafted maybe even in round 2 or 3 and becomes the final piece of the wide receiver room that I am talking about, along with Garrett Wilson, along with the signings of Tyler Johnson and now Josh Reynolds, and along with another kid that they drafted, Malachi Corley. It could be Trey Harris. So keep an eye out on that. I also believe there are 2 defensive linemen that the Jets could be looking at the Ole Miss Pro Day. The first, we talked about it yesterday on Jets Latest. His name is Walter Nolan. Okay, 6'4", 296 pounds. I believe that Nolan is probably going to be drafted at the end of the first round, so he may not be on the board. He may not be available for the Jets at number 42, but you still got to put eyes on him. You still got to get the scouting report. You never know if the Jets trade up, trade down, where they're going to be. I don't think he'll be there at number 42. This is a first-team All-American defensive lineman, had 6.5 sacks, 14 tackles for loss last year, is known to be very twitchy, can get off the ball, can push and pressure the quarterback from the defensive line position. Now, at the same time, Quinnen Williams does that, right? So I don't know if he's the exact fit. I think what they were looking for, and what we talked about yesterday on Jets Latest, is the idea of more that kind of big body, plug up, stop the run defensive tackle in the mode of, Derek Nandi, who we signed. And remember, we also signed Byron Cowart, right? So it's not like the cupboard is bare for us at D-line. But Nolan, as an All-American, would be an incredible add if available, say, at the beginning of round 2. So he is someone that I'm sure the Jets are scouting at the Ole Miss Pro Day. But there is another defensive lineman that I think could be interesting that nobody is talking about just yet. And his name is J.J. Pegues, okay? 6'3", 310 pounds. He is not kind of projected to be a first-round pick, a second-round pick, even a third-round pick. And we haven't talked about this much on Jets Latest. But the Jets, in the 4th round, have pick 110 overall. I think J.J. Pegues could be a target for the Jets with that selection. Check this out. Ole Miss used him as a fullback at times, used him in the Wildcat at times. He had 21 runs as a defensive lineman and scored a touchdown on 18 of them. So he's one of those guys they bring in, you know it. Every team has like the D lineman that they give the ball to sometimes. J.J. Pegues was that guy for Ole Miss. So that obviously speaks to some of the athleticism that he has, right? He was 3rd team All SEC. The SEC is obviously the best conference in football. So even to be 3rd team on the D-line, there are some big boys, some studs, some cute, true NFL high-level talent in the SEC. So being 3rd team SEC, certainly no slouch, especially when you were next to Walter Nolan and he was getting all the pub. Here's another thing that I think is very, very interesting about Pegues. In Ole Miss, they have something called the Chucky Mullins Courage Award. Okay, Chucky Mullins is a guy who played for the team and unfortunately was injured and paralyzed in 1989. In a game for Ole Miss. What they have done to kind of honor this guy, Chucky Mullins, is they have an award named after him, the Courage Award. And every year, there is one member of the Ole Miss football team that is allowed to wear his jersey number, number 38. And that honor was bestowed upon J.J. Pegues. So I think that also speaks to kind of the character, the guy that J.J. Pegues is. Okay, so I think at the Ole Miss Pro Day, a lot of people are going to be talking about Jackson Dart. Please do not get fooled. I don't think the focus is Jackson Dart, even though I guarantee you, you are going to hear all sorts of reports and all sorts of buzz about Jackson Dart at this Pro Day. I think it's the wide receiver, Trey Harris. I think it's the 2 D linemen, Nolan and maybe J.J. Pegues, who could be a target for us in the 4th round, okay, to add to that rotation. Like I said, they brought in Coward, they brought in Nandi. You're next to Quinnen Williams already, okay? So keep an eye out on that. The last thing I want to talk to you is, remember, I've been saying follow the money, right? Whatever kind of positions we target in free agency, that tries to fill holes, and we are then consciously leaving the other holes left empty for the draft. That's part of the reason why I truly believe that the Jets are taking an offensive lineman at number 7 overall. They have not invested money in guys like Noteboom. They have not invested money in guys like Jedrick Wills, who I thought could be an interesting sign in his mid-20s, right? They have now started to sign in the secondary. They have started to sign the defensive linemen. They have started to look at wide receiver, right? I think that leaves offensive linemen as the position of need. So not only do you follow the free agency money, but follow the sports gambling money as well. Odds have started to come out on the sports books across the country about, NFL draft props. And quite frankly, what teams will draft what players. There's also interesting markets of what position will each team draft. And if you look at the Jets, the favorite by far is offensive lineman. The sports books expect the Jets to draft an offensive lineman. At plus 170, it's the favorite. Tight end is the second choice at plus 250. And then wide receiver is the third choice at 5-1. So the odds-on favorite for the Jets to draft is also an offensive lineman. The tight end thing, that is because of all the buzz as it relates to Tyler Warren, right? And I understand that, so the books kind of have to respect that. But I think this just reinforces what I have been saying here on Jets Latest, that the target is offensive linemen. And if you've been watching Jets Latest, you know that I'm talking about Membu out of Missouri or Will Campbell out of LSU. Those are the 2 top offensive linemen. And I think as long as the draft board falls the way we've talked about, and we've mentioned that this week, with hopefully Shedeur Sanders being in the top 6, with hopefully Ashton Genty being in the top 6, with hopefully these other teams not taking the offensive lineman, that leaves the offensive lineman there for us, and we will have our pick of Membu or Campbell. And quite frankly, the sports books agree with me here on Jets Latest. So that'll do it for another episode of Jets Latest. We welcome in Josh Reynolds. Keep your eyes on the Ole Miss Pro Day, but not for Jackson Dart. And I still do believe, and it is being further solidified for me, that we are going offensive lineman at number 7 overall, and we might get one of the best offensive linemen in this draft. Do me a favor, like this video when you see it, subscribe to the Jets channel after you like this content, hit me up in the comments, follow me on Twitter, X, at Spittin' Speeds, and if you want more from me, I am the host of the FTN Fantasy Show over on SiriusXM, the fantasy channel number 87. Every weekday, we talk about fantasy sports. We talk about betting more than just the Jets, the NFL, Major League Baseball, March Madness, and it all. FTN is a great website, data, fantasy, all sorts of tools that you could use to win your leagues and win that cash. Next week, we will continue to look at the draft, look at what the Jets are doing as they try to rebuild this culture, rebuild the roster for the green and white. I hope you enjoy what you are seeing. Tell a Jets fan friend to tell a Jets fan friend. I will certainly be back next week giving you more of the Jets Latest. But for now, have a great weekend, everybody. We out of here. Peace.